Greetings, friends and relatives. Thank you for joining us today live on Facebook. And my name is Lynette Schubles, and we're here at Fort Robinson, Nebraska, or Crawford, Nebraska. And today is our day of education for the Fort Robinson Outbreak Spiritual Run. We're here at the Crawford Community Center, and behind me, you can't really see them. I got Micah here with me, but we also have all of our young people that are sitting behind us that are on the run this year. And usually we have about 130. We're going to show you some of the kids. See, we're all social distanced, and you can see that. Everyone has a mask on, except for me because I'm speaking. So we're here, and today's our day of education. Usually this place is completely packed with our runners, our support people, and then people that come down to learn about the history and all of that. So this year, we're a small group. We have 8 youth runners, and we have about 20 chaperones and drivers. So we're a group of about around 50 people that will be making this journey. So today is our first day, our day of education. We're learning about what happened here at Fort Robinson to the Northern Cheyenne people that broke out. So tonight we will be going live as well. But today, right now, we have a special guest, and she is part of Yellowbird's board of directors. And she is an elder, and she's unable to join us this year because we want to keep her safe. And she's in Oklahoma, but we are so honored that she is going to be sharing with our young people. So thank you to Modern Technology and to all of the young people here that are knowledgeable in technology, because I am not. So we're able to work this out. And so Dr. Henrietta Mann will be, you can see her, she's joining us from Oklahoma, and we're so honored to have her here to share some history with our young people. So we're sharing it with all of you too, our relatives on Facebook Live. So thank you for joining us, Henry. We love you, we miss you, but we're so glad you're safe in your home.
Thank you. I wish that I could see all of the young people and thank them for their prayer run, running with prayer. What we all should think about is that prayer, or our spiritual ways, is the most treasured possession that any of us has. A strong prayer life is so necessary to get us around this journey that we are each walking around this earth. And so keep your prayers strong, not just for this run. And always remember to pray for all life. And I know you do, and to be thankful to our ancestors who made this heroic walk back from where I am here in Oklahoma, back to your beloved Northland, as they called it. So I am very proud of you for running in prayer this year. And I am sure that you will continue to walk with those prayers always, because we as the elders depend upon you in the future to carry on our ways as a people. I was sitting here also and thinking about the water that Reuben was talking about, and the Fort Robinson Outbreak Spiritual Run has had many themes throughout its longevity. And last year it was about earth. Before that it was about water. Today it's about our prayer life. But let us stop for a minute and look at water. When we were babies, and when you were babies, teensy tiny babies that were just growing toward life, you were cushioned, you were nurtured, you were protected, and you were blessed by the womb waters of your mother. For 9 months, you lived in that environment of water. And water is so sacred, especially in terms of, let me jump to Native American church. They say that water comes before life. And indeed it does. Before you as young people came to walk on this earth, your mother's water broke. And that was a sign that you were going to come and live with us and walk this earth with us. And so when you were born, you were primarily water. And as you've gotten older and you're adults, and you're about 70%, maybe 75% water. If you take and look at all the water contained in your body, your brain, your organs, your mind, you're primarily water. And so because you're primarily water, you need to be constantly aware that that water evaporates from your body. It's going to be evaporating when you're running with your prayers. You're going to see that mist come from your mouth and your nostrils. So you need to keep your body filled with water to maintain that balance. There are so many of us when we go to see the doctor who are told, oh, you're dehydrated, you don't drink enough water. But because you are primarily water, you should be drinking about 8 glasses of water a day. That's what you're made of. You're also made of earth. Last year's theme. I am earth. You are earth. So you're water, you're earth. You're also fire. And you never stop to think of these things. There's fire within you, the fire light of life that makes us related to the sun with its life-giving warmth. In much the same way that this earth makes us related to earth and all life, because we're all made up of the same things. And when in our Cheyenne creation story, some of the elders say that when we are given the breath of life from the 4 winds that blow from the sacred directions of this earth, this world in which we live. That's the air, the breath of life that you carry in your lungs. And that makes you related to all air about us and up in the sky. And we're related to those winds that blow from the 4 directions, as is everything else in life. So you are air, you are fire, you are earth, you are water. Lynette and Micah and Reuben and Chief Philip are made up of those same substances. Your parents are. Your ancestors, clear back to the beginning of time, also contain those same basic 4 elements. So if we're all made up, all of us that occupy this wonderful earth are made up of those same four substances that makes us related. I'm your grandmother. You're my grandchildren. Lynette is my sister. Philip is my little brother. Reuben is my nephew. On and on. But we're related to all the elements and things that exist in our environment. And we live in one gigantic kinship system. And because we are kin or related to everybody we know, just as our grandparents have taught us, that we need to live in a respectful, loving relationship with everyone and everything in this world. I want to thank you personally for the way that you all have always treated me when I am able to make the run with you. You bring me water, you bring me food, you make sure you help me to and from our vehicles. You carry my suitcases into our rooms. And that just always makes me feel so good, because those are our teachings that we have carried and that you will continue to carry for the rest of your life. We come from a legacy of very strong, loving, respectful people, brave-hearted people. We as Cheyennes are the like-hearted people. Our hearts are the same. We carry the same values. We have the same view of the world. And our history has been a collective one. There was a time when we, all Cheyennes, were one. We have 10 bands. And we became separated into two geographic locations of the Northern Cheyenne and the Southern Cheyenne. And we, as Southerners, were moved into what we now know to be the state of Oklahoma. And you all, as Northerners, continued to live in what is characterized as your beloved homelands, where you can smell the fragrance of the pines, where you get the cool air from the mountains, where your ancestors have lived. And we have our own histories as a people. We have our own creation accounts, but we have been on what is characterized as a road of life, which we have walked since the beginning of time, a road of life where we've all collectively walked it, and some of our ancestors and have walked on to that gigantic camp beyond the Milky Way, where everyone that has ever walked on earth lives, continues to live, except those that have committed suicide or those that have led a very mean and harsh life. And so we have a place to go. Each of us individually is on a journey, but we take that journey with all of the people on this road of life. And on that road of life, we have experienced new things, different things. And a change came to us historically when news of our part of the world reached the Europe of that time. That country or that hemisphere was very crowded. And so after Christopher Columbus made his journey in 1492, word just spread in that other part of the world, the lands that our ancestors had lived in since the beginning of time. And there was what is called a papal bull issued from the Catholic Pope that said something to the effect that those that went out on expeditions to discover new lands, new places, new peoples, could own those lands so long as they were not Christians that inhabited those lands. Well, in our hemisphere, we're indigenous peoples. And when our worlds were created, we were given our own ways to pray. We were given our own spiritual ways. We were given our own ceremonies. We were given our sacred sites. And all of us are a very spiritual people. But when those strangers came from the East, like our great prophet, Sweet Medicine, told us, they brought their own ways. They brought their own thinking. Ironically, a lot of them fled the Europe at that time, after 1492, seeking religious freedom, freedom to pray, freedom to worship the way they wanted to, freedom. And what is so difficult at times, even for me to understand, is they came seeking freedom. They came seeking a new way of life called democracy. And you can put that in the context of what happened at the White House on Wednesday. But they carried these new ways with them because they wanted to be able to express them in a new land, in a new place. And this homeland of ours, for them, was a new place. Never mind that we, as the first peoples to love this land and to live with it, had lived here for thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years for us since the beginning of time. And they wanted to change us. And then the next thing they did, and this is an understanding of our background to what was happening prior to Fort Robinson that took place, a history that you should know. It's good that you know our history as statistics, but you need to put that in the context of what went on around us. And once those new strangers established their own, and it was a new government on this land, and they enacted policy. Never mind the fact that we as a people had our own traditional forms of government. The Council of 44 peace chiefs, of which Philip is one. People, men that are respected within our community, who have a responsibility for all of us, who, and we are their children, so to speak. And they are the chiefs that look after us, that protect us. And so those forms of our own traditional form of government continues to exist. But on the other hand, those strangers that Sweet Medicine told us were going to come from the East did bring their own ways. They established their own government. And it was a new form of government. What we should also realize and recognize is that those people that came here out of histories of monarchies, like they have the Queen in the United Kingdom. They came here out of histories of dictatorships. They had no idea or concept of what democracy was until they reached the shores of this our land. And in terms of what happened this past week, they have not really embraced or understand this whole concept of democracy. Unfortunately, what we saw happen at the White House is a minute, a little bit of history that really happened to us as a people's contact, like Fort Robinson, like the Sand Creek massacre of our peoples in 1864, like the Battle of the Washita. We, as this land's indigenous peoples, first to love this land, were treated in very disrespectful and harsh ways by those strangers who came to live with us. So we come out of that experience, and I would sit here in my home and feel sympathy and compassion for what our country's elected leaders must have been feeling and fearing as they were confined in the United States Capitol. In much the same way that our ancestors must have felt when they were confined in that very small 30 by 30 foot unheated barracks, a building at Fort Robinson, confined there without food, without heat, and without water. They got thirsty, and it was so cold, the weather was frigid, that in order to get that moisture to replenish their bodies, and we know how important water is to us, they scraped the ice from the windows. There were just 2 windows to get some water. And so the first thing that those strangers did after creating their form of government, which incidentally is patterned upon the government of the Haudenosaunee people of New York State, who have a man that came to them called the Great Peacemaker, who established their form of government with its democratic ideals and provisions that Benjamin Franklin, and you've heard of Benjamin Franklin, admired. And so consequently, that particular form of government, of democracy and peace, was incorporated into this new government that those strangers developed on the SR shores. Never mind that there were nations upon nations of peoples in the hundreds who had their own forms of government. And so once this government was established, our history with the non-Indians is divided into about 4 different periods. And that first period that existed from about 1789 to 1871 is what is called the treaty period. That is the time when this new government made treaties with the respective indigenous nations that lived on this earth. That is why we can say today that we have a government-to-government relationship with the United States federal government. That was established through those treaties that were negotiated with our ancestors. Among them, the first, the 1851 Treaty of Fort Laramie, that we call the Great Horse Creek Treaty because it was negotiated on Horse Creek in Wyoming. So Senator Daniel Inouye, whom I worked with, had and I was the one that walked the halls of Congress, said that there were 800 treaties negotiated with the various Indian nations. Our historians say there were 500, whatever, about 300 plus were ratified by the Senate of the United States of America that ratifies all our treaties, still does today. And so they were in the treaty making period. Treaties, unfortunately, not only maintained this government to government relationship to sovereign nations one to another, those treaties were utilized as a means of taking our land, eroding our land base, because those people that came here thought it was their God-given right to settle this land from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. God-given right. And they wanted to manifest their own belief systems, their way of thinking of capitalism, and expand it clear across the country. And yet we lived in the interior of this country as one of the nations. Others lived here too. And so this vast homeland of ours was a lot of it taken from us at the Great Horse Creek Treaty. But we managed to reserve for our use as Cheyennes and Arapahoes a vast area of land that today straddles the 4 states of Wyoming, Nebraska, Colorado, and Kansas, and the entire Rocky Mountain Eastern Front. We were huge land barons. We had vast land holdings. We may retain that. Our leaders retain that land for us. What is also notable about the Fort Lyrium Treaty is that it was the only treaty where the entire Cheyenne Nation attended. And after this treaty was negotiated and signed by 6 of our leaders, then the Cheyennes held our annual ceremonies. The arrow renewal ceremony, the sun dance, and usually followed by a gigantic buffalo hunt, a bison hunt. And so those treaties are the basis for maintaining this government to government relationship, but were means of transferring land. And the government negotiated treaties, about 300, maybe 350 or so, ratified by the United States Senate. And those treaties were made until 1871. All of a sudden, this new United States government decided it was no longer going to enter into treaties with us as indigenous nations. They had to change policies. They had already transferred huge land cessions into non-Indian hands. And so suddenly in the appropriation bill of 1871, there was a very poorly written resolution that was adopted that said that the United States of America was going to cease making treaties with us. So they did it rather arbitrarily. It was just something that they decided to do. No more treaties, no more treaties. And yet some of our treaties gave us perpetual rights to continue to hunt in our territories, continue to live there supposedly in peace and friendship. That was usually the first paragraph of all of those treaties that were negotiated between the United States of America and the various Indian nations, the Cheyenne Nation. Treaties of peace and friendship. Well, in 1871, that policy ceased and they switched to what? they call the reservation policy and began to establish reservations. We still had too much land. That land that we had, the eastern front of the Rocky Mountain Range, the land that straddled those portions of those 4 states, the government believed was just too much for us. And so then they decided that they were going to confine us to reservations. And then they were going to open up or take the other land that were outside of those reservation boundaries. And so it is into this environment that you find all of the so-called Indian wars take place during the reservation period, Fort Robinson and the like. But that was followed, jumping ahead very quickly, and we'll come back, by what is called the Allotment Policy. The government adopted a piece of legislation that said that we as Indian people were going to take allotments, that we had to learn to become farmers and the like, and that we were to own this land. The heads of household were given 160 acres. Orphans and the like were given 80 acres, and then 40 acres were given to the women and children. We did not all get 160 acres like some people like to say. It was only the heads of household that did. Well, once this allotment process was established and by the federal government, what was left then was allotted. That I talked about the allotment period. In the General Allotment Act, these surplus lands could be opened up to white settlement or to homesteading. These that are called, what you would call them, crawling ants. They're the crawling white ants in terms of our language. And so through the General Allotment Act itself, we as Indian nations throughout the country lost 90 million acres through allotment. 90 million acres. Those people that came here, those strangers that came from Europe, they immigrated here. And then I sit and watch television when I look at this current administration's policy of immigration and the separation, unfortunately, of those Hispanic children at the southern borders of this country. They were immigrants at one time. And our grandparents let them come in, negotiated those treaties, and then became subject to those policies. And then the allotment period existed until 1934. That's a good year. It was when the Indian Reorganization Act was formed, and the federal government says, oh, we've taken their lifestyle away from them. Well, very fortunately for us as a peoples, the Council of 44 Peace Chiefs continued to exist, but their power was essentially taken from them through the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934. Now, this is in my lifetime. You've heard about Johnson O'Malley. That was enacted in 1934, which provided funds for the education of Indian children, and allowed for us to sort of redevelop our traditional forms of government, but to reorganize. And there are those of our historians today and those that have made a study of our history as a peoples who say that we are still in that constant state of reorganization. 1934 was 86 years ago. I was born in the year of 1934. The Johnson O'Malley Act was passed in April I was born in May, and the Indian Reorganization Act was passed in June, extended the ability to reorganize and create our own forms of government. So that's why you got your government on your reservation. And so we seem to be in a constant state of reorganization. I don't know how that's going to last. But let's go back to the reservation period. I've already mentioned that in the eyes of the United States federal government, we had too much land in reservations. And they were very bold, and they ordered us into the reservations. We had to go and live on those reservations. There were those people, we were separated, we were moved around. And I remember the words of Red Cloud, who said, "The great white father moves us around so much, why doesn't he just put us on wheels?" Because we were being disrupted, our ways of life were being disrupted, our lands were being taken from us, our land bases was being eroded, and here was the reservation policies. Now you go into the reservation. And of course, we love those reservation homelands of ours, but that they were forced by the federal government. And in 1875, the federal government told those that were still out to report to their agencies. And those that were still out with some of the Northern Cheyenne, some of the Lakota, people like Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull. And they were told, you report to the reservation. This was in December of 1875, when orders went out from the respective government agencies to the Northern Cheyenne, the Lakota, the Northern Arapaho, report to your agencies. And if you don't report by January 31st, you will be deemed essentially hostiles, and the military will deal with you. Military, very quick to engage in acts of war. So in March of 1876, the encampment of Northern Cheyenne, one of the Old Man chiefs, Old Bear, was attacked by soldiers under the command of General George Crook, known by our ancestors as 3 Stars Crook, because of his rank and the stars that he wore on his epaulets, 3 stars. And he attacked that camp of Old Bear. Well, they had decided that they could not report into their agency because it was wintertime, there was snow, their horses were very weak, horses couldn't do well or walk well in snow, and neither could the people. And so because they hadn't reported in, then the military came to get them, to take them into their homelands by force. So they start with this attack on the Northern Cheyenne camp of Old Bears. The poor Cheyennes were treated so sadly. Their property was burned in much the same way that the property had been burned at the Sand Creek Massacre of 1864 and at the Battle of the Washita in 1868. And the people, those that survived that battle, fled up a very rocky mesa, and they sat up there as these soldiers burned their property. And they say that some of them cried to see their wealth disappear into the fire. Well, the hunters had been out, the warriors had been out, most of them to get food for the camp. And very fortunately, they arrived. But what George Crook's men did was to take the Cheyenne pony herd of Old Bear's people with them. They drove the horses in front of them. And so whenever our warriors came back and saw that the horses were gone, they pursued them, and they brought about half of the pony herd that Crook's men had captured back. And so then the old people and the children and those that were weak and couldn't walk were able to ride on those horses. And they decided to walk to Crazy Horse's camp through that harsh, cold weather, and they did. And Crazy Horse welcomed them when he was presented with the pipe. And the people, with very generous hearts, began to give them things that they could use, that they needed, because they had nothing but the very clothes that they wore on their backs, and maybe a light blanket, and a lot of them were without moccasins. And so they met in council, Crazy Horse's people, Northern Cheyenne, and decided that they couldn't report into the agencies, and instead they would go look for Sitting Bull's camp. And so they did. Huge camp, thousands upon thousands, a huge encampment with as many warriors. And we know what happened. At the Battle of the Greasy Grass, as it is called, we know was the Battle of Little Bighorn on June 25th, 1876. And Custer's guidon, his flag, was captured, which is the worst thing that could happen to a commander. And it disappeared and was taken as a sign of victory for having defeated the 7th Cavalry of the United States military. It was such a moment of victory and glory for us, but then it became the beginning of the end for us, because the federal government said you can't just do this to us and get away with it. And it was a reservation policy, and someone decided that all Indians were going to be concentrated in this state where I was born, Oklahoma. Today, there are 39 Indian nations that live in Oklahoma, but it had been the plan of the federal government to concentrate all of the Indians across our beloved country here in this state, out of the way of westward expansion, out of the way of those immigrants that were going across our hunting lands. And so the government just decided it was going to teach us a lesson. How can you defeat their military and get away with it? And so in 1877, about 1,000 Northern Cheyennes were sent south, a lot of them walking, some in wagons. But Crook had told them that they didn't want to go to Oklahoma. And so Crook, and there was one other officer, and his name slips my mind at this point in time, said, no, you go down there, and if you don't like it, then you can come back north. And so Little Chief took the Northern Cheyennes down there, about 1,000 of them, to live with the Southern Cheyennes. Well, they got down there. It was a very hot, dusty, humid climate. And they were not accustomed to it. They were accustomed to the fresh mountain air scented with pines of your beloved homeland. your beloved Northland. And they stayed there about a year. And so many of the children were starving to death, and many of them were contacting measles and dying from it because the climate of Oklahoma, there were a lot of mosquitoes who carry malaria. And so Little Wolf and Dull Knife went into Agent Miles in charge of the reservation. There was a reservation at this time here. They went into Darlington and told Agent Miles that they were going to leave. They were going to walk back home. And he said, you can't do that. And he says, no, General Crook told us that we could come down here, and if we didn't like it here, we could go back home. And some of the leaders were sent on a delegation to Washington, D.C., and they raised the issue of living in your beloved Northland there, and were given permission by some individual high up in government that they could go back home. Of course, they weren't allowed to go. And so then chiefs, Little Wolf and Dull Knife, Morning Star, decided they were going to walk back home. A 1,500-mile walk. They did on a September morning, September 9th of 1878. And they started them. They left their lodges standing. They left the fires burning because there was a military squadron that had been put around them to watch them and to keep them confined to the southern plains of Oklahoma. But they left with about 300 Northern Cheyennes. And they walked. There were very few horses. They encountered, they fought with the government 700 times, 7 times, 7, not 700, 7 times. They crossed 3 railroad tracks, and they got to the Nebraska Sandhills. And that was when they separated. Dull Knife decided to go to Red Cloud Agency from where they had left. Little Wolf stayed out in the sandhills of Nebraska. And that was where Dull Knife just walked into the soldiers in a snowstorm, as if they came out of a cloud. And they were taken to Fort Robinson. And they were threatened with being sent back here to Oklahoma. And they said, we're not going to go back. We would rather die. And we know what happened at Fort Robinson. Why you're running, what you will learn, what you will do. But I've given you a very brief thumbnail sketch of Indian history, Cheyenne history, and the tragedy that we have endured as a people. But always remember that you come from the brave and the mighty Morning Star people, that your ancestors sacrificed a lot, and you know not all of them reached home. And so today I thought you needed to know that background, because our schools don't teach that. So I'm finished, Lynette. If there are any questions or comments, I can try to take some.
Thank you so much, Henry, for sharing the history of what happened at Fort Robinson. And that's really, I hope our audience out there and our youth here really listen, because you said a lot in a short time. That history is really important, from the treaties, what happened before, leading up to where we are now. And today, we're getting ready. This happened on this day, January 9th, 1879. And so we're here at our Day of Education here in Nebraska. And tonight, at the actual time it happened, approximately 10:30 at night, our runners will be breaking out of those rebuilt barracks. The barracks were burned down, but later rebuilt. And so we will go into those barracks, and tonight we'll be breaking out and starting our journey home, finishing the journey that our ancestors could not. And so all of the information that you shared, Henry, is so important. And I hope, everybody listens to that, and it'll be on our Yellowbird Facebook page, so you can go back. And the young people here too, you can go back to our Yellowbird Facebook page and listen again. This is knowledge that we all need to know. And we always say history, if forgotten, will repeat itself. And it may not be in the exact way, but in some form. And we actually see that happening today in different ways. And so, we value you, Henry. We value your wisdom, knowledge, everything that you shared with us. And, we send all of our love to you. Like I said before, we wish you were here with us physically, but we know you're here with us in spirit. And we look forward to the day that we can be together again, and we could hug you. And we miss that. We miss your spirit here with us. And so we send all of our love to you. And our young people, maybe we can tell them, Henry, Nia-ish maybe on a count of 3. We can all do that, lift that up so we can see. Okay, you guys ready? 1, 2, 3. Nia-ish.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Henry, thank you so much. We love you. Yeah, sending all our good energy to you. Yeah.
How about now?
Yeah. And we'll keep
Philip.
in touch.
Now-ish.
Yeah.
Hey, Grandma Henry. Auntie.
Yeah.
Since you nephewed me. Hey, Auntie.
Good to see you.
Yep,
Okay, and then we have Philip. He can greet you before we end our Zoom broadcast and go back to our Day of Education here. We're almost ready for lunch, but you want to greet Henry before she gets off the line. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Have a wonderful trip back.
Thank you. Yeah, we will.